Hi everyone, and welcome to KSAU Master Talk. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Barook, a global expert in vaccine research and development. Today, we will talk about his journey, his achievement, and the future of vaccine. Dr. Dan, thank you for joining us today. We would like to start about talking about yourself. What gets you interested in immunology and vaccine?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. When I graduated from college, I traveled to the UK and I did a PhD in immunology. And then I went back to Boston to do my medical training. And for my medical training, I became interested in global health and infectious disease. So I started my research lab about 20 years ago on vaccine development because that was a natural intersection of my scientific interests in immunology and my clinical interests in global health and infectious disease.
So I know you worked on vaccine toward different diseases, COVID-19, Zika, HIV, and more other. Which one the biggest project that you are working on? Which one of them?
Well, I started my research lab about 20 years ago, and we started working on HIV pathogenesis, immunology, and vaccine development. And that still remains a project today. The development of an HIV vaccine is one of the great unsolved problems in the biomedical research world. But while we're continuing to work on HIV, then we started to work on other pathogens over the course of the last 10 years, starting with the Zika outbreak in 2016 and other flaviviruses. And then when SARS-CoV-2 emerged in 2019 and 2020, then we spent a lot of time and effort working on COVID-19 vaccines and treatments and pathogenesis and immunology research. And now we're actually working on a variety of different pathogens, including influenza and tuberculosis and filoviruses and flaviviruses, and actually many other different virus classes as well.
For HIV vaccine, I know it's a very hard area to develop, and I know there's a lot of challenge that you're facing. Are we close to get any results soon?
For HIV vaccines, over the last 40 years of the HIV pandemic, there have been only 5 HIV vaccine concepts that have been tested in efficacy trials worldwide. We were very involved in the development of and the testing of that last concept. And that vaccine trial showed that it was safe and had a low level of efficacy, but not high enough to become distributed as a clinical vaccine. Right now, there are no HIV vaccine trials that are large scale and aimed at efficacy, and there probably won't be for a number of years. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we're going to have an HIV vaccine in the next few years. But basic research is ongoing, and basic research continues to unravel the mysteries and challenges of HIV. But the challenges for an HIV vaccine are unique for HIV. And if it weren't for HIV vaccine research, then there is no way that we would have developed COVID-19 vaccines as quickly. So the value of HIV research goes well beyond HIV itself, and actually is virology and immunology research overall.
True. COVID-19, Johnson & Johnson vaccine was a successful story. So tell us more about it. I know you were a part of it.
So we started to develop Ad26 vectors for HIV. And when COVID-19 emerged, then that was one of the lead vaccine strategies for SARS-CoV-2. And so we worked together with an industry partner, J&J, in the development of an Ad26-based COVID vaccine that was successful, and that was tested in global phase 3 trials and was approved under emergency use authorization for use during the pandemic.
So I know you had won the prize of King Faisal Prize in 2023 because of this important impact that you put. How this is reflected on the work you're doing now?
Well, the King Faisal Prize in 2023 was a great honor. I was really humbled to receive it here in Riyadh in 2023, and it was really wonderful to be recognized along with my co-recipient, Dr. Sarah Gilbert, for work done during the pandemic. In part, it was collaboration for the development of the J&J vaccine, but also advancing science as a whole for the pandemic and SARS-CoV-2 virology and immunology research.
So we know that vaccine does not only save life; it's changed the whole world. Recently, with the COVID hitting, people start talking more about vaccine and about COVID. And there's a lot of misinformation going around on vaccine. How can we deal with it? How can we make people trust more science and vaccine again with all this misinformation in social media?
There's always been a degree of vaccine hesitancy and a degree of vaccine misinformation, but it reached really a fever pitch during the pandemic. The forces associated with vaccine misinformation were much stronger than any of us had anticipated or realized. And I think that we still don't really know the dynamics and the sociology of misinformation. But it's very clear that as doctors and scientists, we need to do more than a well-designed phase 3 study and show vaccine efficacy and have a p-value that looks attractive to convince people to take a vaccine. So I think part of it is engaging the public, winning the trust of the public, always being honest and upfront with the public about the pros and the cons of vaccines. And I think with that, then public trust will need to be rebuilt.
Yeah, I think this is one of the major challenges that we're facing now towards vaccine. People start not trusting the scientists because of all this misinformation. The other important thing, are we close enough, or do we have personalized vaccine, for example, for cancer patient?
Cancer vaccines are vaccines of the future and maybe of the imminent future. With the success of vaccine technologies and the success of cancer immunotherapies, then cancer vaccine is clearly the next frontier for cancer therapy. And there's some very promising cancer vaccine trials that have shown promise in phase 2 trials that are in phase 3 trials now for personalized cancer vaccines. And I think that there's a lot of hope that cancer vaccines, either personalized or non-personalized, might soon become part of treatment of patients.
So as an expert in immunology and vaccine, you saw yesterday how the young scientists were throwing a lot of question and discussion with you. I never saw it before. Like it took more than 45 minutes of question. What's your suggestion to those young scientists that they would like to follow your footsteps?
I think that for young scientists interested in vaccine development, first, I would commend them because vaccines have probably saved more lives than any other intervention.
Totally agree.
Except possibly for the development of clean water. That's a quote from one of my idols, Stanley Plotkin, who wrote that in the introduction of his book called Vaccines.
True. Yeah.
That vaccines have saved more lives than any other human intervention, with the exception of the development of clean water, which is a very profound statement. So I think that now there's more technologies to develop vaccines and more need for vaccines given pandemic threats as well as chronic diseases. So we have a need for vaccines. We have the technology to develop vaccines, and we know that vaccines are hugely impactful. The COVID-19 vaccines have been estimated to save over 20 million lives in the year 2021 alone. So the vaccines are hugely impactful. My advice for young scientists would be to follow their passions and take the long view, because vaccine development is difficult and it involves a lot of ups and downs. It's multidisciplinary. There's basic science, there's clinical science, there's social science involved, and often involves multiple complex collaborations. So my advice to young scientists is to tackle hard problems, because the hard problems are the most interesting in the end.
If you have the chance to solve one of those hard problems, which one you will choose?
For me, it would be HIV and TB.
Yeah.
Because HIV and TB are two global health problems that we have that claim a tremendous number of lives. We have no HIV vaccine. We do have a TB vaccine, but it doesn't work all that well. And I think that we need a better TB vaccine.
What do you think the coming 10 to 20 years the vaccine will look like? Vaccine development?
I think that in the next decade or 2 decades, there's going to be the generation of a lot more vaccines. And I think it's not going to be limited to vaccines for infectious diseases. I think we're going to have vaccines for cancer. I think we might have vaccines for rheumatologic disease, autoimmune diseases. We might have vaccines for many other classes of illnesses. I don't think vaccines are going to be solely relegated for prevention and treatment of infectious disease, because vaccines is a general strategy that can modulate the immune system, can increase immune responses, can potentially decrease immune responses, or can modulate immune responses. And by manipulating the immune system, then we have tremendous ability to cure or prevent human diseases in multiple different categories. So I think we're going to see the development of vaccines for infectious disease as well as in other non-infectious disease areas.
And to wrap up, before I finished, a lot of people think vaccine only for prevention. Is this true?
Classically, vaccines are used to prevent infectious disease, but they can also be used as therapy. They can be used in many different ways. And in some cases, vaccines can be used in people who are already infected to either cure or to prevent the reemergence of diseases. A classic example is the zoster vaccine. People who might be infected with VZV then could receive a vaccine to prevent the development of shingles later on. That's a classic example of a therapeutic vaccine.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dan. Thank you for visiting us here in Saudi Arabia in KSAU. It was a pleasure having you, and it was a great opportunity to learn and listen to you for myself and all my.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for listening. Stay tuned for more inspiring conversation, and see you soon.